Hi everybody, it's Annette from The Art of Intuition, and today we're going to talk about timelines that are collapsing and how can we still be in a collapsing timeline. So this is a phenomenon that you will grow to understand the more times you go through it. When you're actually in a timeline that is not aligned long term, and what you're going to find with timelines is that as your vibration increases, timelines tend to become more and more unaligned as you ascend your consciousness. So the higher your vibration goes, the higher your consciousness goes, the more your body's vibration raises, the more all the timelines that you're currently in or at some point or another are going to not be aligned anymore. Now, this can happen very subtly. Sometimes it can happen pretty quickly, but normally we kind of know that timelines are not aligned as much as they were before. Like we used to do something, let's say it was a job, you can even say it's a relationship, whether it be romantic or like a friendship that you were in, and in the beginning it was very aligned and you enjoyed doing it, you enjoyed maybe being with the person, you enjoyed doing the job, and as your consciousness changed, as your vibration raised, as your connection within got stronger and stronger, all of a sudden these things, they don't feel the same anymore. They don't bring the same level of joy. They don't bring the same level of happiness that they did before. They're not getting you to feel that way. And when I say they don't bring that level of happiness, they're not activating that happiness inside anymore. They're not as good of a match as they were before. So we go through this period where it's aligned still. So people will always ask me that question, how can it be aligned and not aligned at the same time? Well, it's still aligned to something you're projecting. So whether it's a program you're running inside, a cellular program you're projecting, whether it's still clearing something, whether it's something you still agreed to be a part of, it's still serving a purpose and there's still a reason it's still there. It's not aligned long term, and you'll start to feel when you're pulling out of a timeline because you're not getting the enjoyment out of it anymore. But it was aligned at some point, at some level of consciousness you were giving off. It was aligned to something. Now it's not as aligned anymore. So when this starts to happen, we're going to call this a timeline that's collapsing. And you can be in a collapsed timeline for years. You could be at a job that this is a collapsed timeline. This is not the highest aligned reality I'm going to have. There's a lot of things here that don't match a consciousness level I'm at. There's a lot of things here that aren't going to match me long term, but it's not time yet. And sometimes you'll just get that message, it's not time yet. When it's time for this to be done, it'll be done, which means you still have a purpose there. It's just a collapsing timeline. It just has not collapsed yet. Now, the difference of how we can be in a collapsing timeline, and when I say we, I don't mean this as a judgment, but if you're completely unconscious, you usually just let timelines collapse because you don't notice the subtlety of when they start not becoming aligned anymore because you're kind of too attached to the timeline. And we're in our human consciousness, we're always kind of too attached to the timeline, and we don't feel the subtleness of it when it's starting to not be aligned anymore. It's no longer aligned, so we don't feel that when we're human. We're not as able to feel the subtle shifts in our vibration. We don't notice happy, and what made us happy, is probably not what I want to say. It didn't trigger the happiness within us. We weren't just enjoying the reality. But when you're human, you don't really know what enjoying a reality is because there's so many stops and starts with frequencies of happiness when you're in a human consciousness, in a human body, still in that human DNA, because your body can't really hold on to that feeling of happiness, that frequency. So we really don't know what it is. We might have good days, bad days at a job or with a person, but we don't really cut things off. We don't really end realities. We kind of just wait till they kind of collapse. And it's more of a dramatic collapse because we hold on to it. We don't want to let it go. Whereas when you shift your perception and you start to shift your consciousness, you can start to feel the ones that aren't going to be there long term. The people that aren't going to be there long term, the jobs that aren't going to be there long term, the opportunities that you have now that aren't going to be there long term, maybe the place you live, you just sit there and maybe it's a landlord you're dealing with or someone you're sharing a home with and you go, this is not long term. But it's still not time yet. It's a collapsing timeline. So if we kind of start identifying things as that, like we know this isn't aligned long term, it's still aligned for certain purposes I'm trying to achieve right now. It's still aligned with something. There's still a purpose while it's there. And sometimes we'll understand that purpose of why we had to be there. Sometimes we don't till we're completely out of the timeline. And then we understand why we had to be there as long as we were. But there's still more to do. We might have to wait for other people to be in a certain place for our next reality to come in. Now, just remember that a new reality can't come in when we still have the old one here. So when we're in these collapsing timelines, just be prepared for when it does finally collapse. And usually once we know it's a collapsing timeline and we start to prepare for the next timeline, even though we don't know what that is, we energetically start to prepare. You might see things you're supposed to do. Oh, maybe I'm supposed to take this course online. Maybe I'm supposed to start looking at places to go live, even though I might not have the funds to do that yet, or I'm still in a lease here. I know the time is coming. I need to be ready to go when the time comes. Maybe I need to just start collecting some money and, putting it away for this next reality, even though I'm not 100% sure when exactly this thing is going to end. I just know it's going to end. I've been in a couple of jobs like that where I knew the timeline wasn't aligned anymore and it was going to collapse. And I just kind of decided I was going to ride it till the end, to the conclusion. And if we kind of make that agreement with our universe that when it's time to go, we're just going to go, and we're not going to have any type of sadness about it, we're not going to be upset about it, we're just going to go and be excited about it. We're going to be excited for the next thing, and we'll grieve anything we have going on with it and get rid of purge all those emotions we have about it. But we're just going to be able to walk on to the next thing. We're just going to be able to go on to the next reality. Now, sometimes it can take time. I'm going to just use linear time here because we have to clear everything we had about that old reality. Sometimes the new stuff doesn't come in right away. We don't end something one day and the next day something comes in. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes we have to maybe be in a transitionary phase for maybe a couple of years. Maybe it is kind of the next reality, but it still might be a transitionary phase. It could be a couple of weeks, it could be a month, where you're kind of completely clearing out that old timeline from your energy field, because you have to clear it from your field. So if you're in a timeline that you know is collapsing, do not worry, my friend. We've all been in them. Just know that it will at some point get to its inevitable conclusion. And it's how we react to that conclusion that shows us kind of where we are in our journey and how attached we are to the reality. As humans, we get really attached to these realities, and as our higher selves, we start to understand that it's kind of a means to the end, in a sense. Like everything in a way is kind of fleeting for us to get to our next one. Now, there's also going to be a point in a process where you might go on to the next reality, and you might try to be aligning everything. We're just going to pick a level of consciousness. If you're in like an 8 or 9D dimensional level of consciousness and you're aligning your realities to these levels of consciousness, or actually I'll come back. That'll be another video. I was going to explain something else. We're going to do that in another video. So you're in a certain level of consciousness and you're trying to align your realities, but you might have a couple things over here that aren't aligned yet. And they're not aligned. Sometimes we just have to kind of not pay attention to them and just say, okay, that's not aligned. Let me just put that over there. I know it's not aligned, and I know when certain things line up, certain realities start to line up, certain people maybe start to show up, certain things start to happen, this will now become aligned, and then I'll be able to take care of these that aren't aligned. I think I messed my wording up there, but you get the point. We can go back to these other things and clear them up, but right now it might not be time to clear them up, so you might have like 98% of your reality aligned on your level of consciousness on a soul level, but you still know you got a couple things kind of over here that you have not been able to either get rid of because it might take a certain amount of money to close out that reality, that you haven't been able to achieve that level of, that level of energy yet. We're just going to say energy. It hasn't come yet because you're waiting for a certain reality might have to come in before you can completely detach from these things. So if you feel like you do have some things that aren't aligned, just look at where you are in the timeline with them and just get to the peace inside knowing that a lot of these are collapsing timelines and they can collapse for many years. It's our attachment to the timeline that makes the collapse really, really harsh and really, really upsetting. Or, we'll get caught with our energetic panties down in a sense because we knew it was coming but we weren't ready. And usually you're going to know it's coming a long time ahead. Look at your dream state too. If you're not sure if something's ending, that'll usually give you the hint that, hey, this is going to come to a complete collapse at some point. So just know it's going to come, and how you handle that is what's important. Like sometimes you might hear someone say, and I can't remember this from a lot of mine that have been collapsing. I knew they were going to end. And someone would say, oh, if it was someone who's going to move away, they'd be like, oh, we're going to be here for 3 or 4 more years. And I'm like, no, there's no way. You're going to be done by May. Because I just knew, this is going to be done by May. You're not going to be here in May. And all of a sudden, they just leave. Like suddenly they get an opportunity and they're gone, like just like that. So even if you feel like these things have hung around for a while, you'll be surprised at how quickly, when it's time. There was a line in a book. I can't remember what book it was. I think it was one of the Penny Pierce books I read years and years ago. When the soul is done, it's done. And you could have been in a reality for 4 or 5 years and you kind of knew it was a reality that was closing out. And then just in one day it was done and it was over, and that was it. Because it was 100% complete at that point. It had no more purpose to serve. And that was just how it was. Now sometimes you're in these realities with people who are completely unconscious to show them what consciousness is and how it is to come from your purest and highest place all the time. Sometimes you're in it for that too. So, excuse me, I'm getting over some clearing on my own. That's why my voice sounds a little more raspier than normal. So just take a look at where your timelines are. Don't judge where any of them are. Look at the ones you're really attached to. That's kind of going to be your tell. It's always your tell. The ones that you're really afraid of ending, the ones that you really have a lot of fear on, if it's people you're really attached to, even though you know long-term they're not aligned, that's where we got to go. And that's where we got to look at. And keep practicing the art of intuition.